Hello everyone. Before we get started, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. That way, YouTube knows to keep sharing more stories like this with you. Now, let's jump in. I still remember that morning like it was carved into my head. I was 15. Tired from staying up too late and walking into school like any other day. The halls felt strange right away though. Not the normal chaos of kids rushing around or hanging at lockers. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that instantly made my stomach knot. As I stepped into the main hallway, I noticed doors closed and blinds pulled. It took me a second to realize that everyone was hiding. Every classroom I passed had kids huddled low, peeking out of small windows or crouched behind desks. Something was wrong, and I didn't know what, but I knew enough to do what they were doing. I slipped into the nearest classroom and dropped to the floor with the others. The silence was broken by the faint wail of sirens somewhere outside. They weren't far, maybe right at the edge of the school grounds, getting louder by the second. It wasn't the kind of drill we'd practiced before. This felt real. My heart pounded in my ears. I didn't ask anyone what was going on because no one was talking. Everyone just stared at each other, wide-eyed, waiting, listening. The air was heavy and still. I remember clutching the cold metal leg of a desk, squeezing it until my hand hurt, just to keep from shaking. Minutes dragged like hours. Every sound made me flinch. The creak of the building, the shuffle of a shoe, even my own breathing. My mind was racing with thoughts of an active shooter roaming the halls, of doors bursting open, of screams. I tried to tell myself it was just a lockdown drill gone too far, but the sirens outside told me otherwise. Fear kept crawling up my spine. I thought of my parents, of how they wouldn't even know what was happening until it was too late, of how maybe I wouldn't make it home. I wanted to text them, but pulling out my phone felt like it would draw attention, like somehow whoever was out there would know. After what felt like forever, the sirens stopped. There was no gunfire, no shouting, just this thick silence pressing down on us. Eventually, a voice came over the intercom, shaky and uneven, telling us to remain where we were. That did nothing to calm the fear. I kept imagining footsteps coming closer, a shadow at the door. No one moved, no one whispered. It was like we were all holding the same breath, waiting for something we couldn't see. It wasn't until later, much later, that we found out the truth. There hadn't been a shooter roaming the school. There wasn't someone hunting us. What happened was worse in a different way. A kid, one of the quiet ones, had gone into the bathroom with a Glock and ended his life. Just like that. The chaos we felt, the lockdown, the fear. It was all because of that single moment in the bathroom that none of us saw coming. He didn't hurt anyone else, just himself. But the shockwave of it tore through the whole school. At first, it didn't even make sense to me. I kept waiting for someone to correct the story, to say no, it was something else. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I thought about how I had seen him before, always by himself, barely talking to anyone, blending into the background. I never paid much attention. None of us really did. He wasn't the type to cause trouble, not the type anyone would expect to bring a gun to school. But he had, and instead of pointing it outward, he turned it on himself. The school stayed locked down for hours. Police swarmed the place, officers moving through the halls, checking rooms, their heavy boots echoing against the tile. We were eventually escorted out, one class at a time, single file, hands visible. Walking out felt unreal, like stepping onto a movie set. There were squad cars everywhere, flashing lights bouncing off the windows, officers talking into radios. I kept expecting news cameras to show up. The air outside felt cold, even though it wasn't a cold day. Parents were waiting in clusters, some crying, some just staring at the building like it had turned into something monstrous. When I got home that night, my body felt heavy, drained in a way I'd never experienced before. I sat on my bed and just stared at the wall. I couldn't stop hearing the sirens in my head, couldn't stop replaying the silence of the classroom, the tension in the air. Sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the house made me jolt awake, heart racing. I kept seeing flashes of that bathroom, even though I hadn't been there. My mind built an image of what it must have looked like, and it was worse than anything I wanted to imagine. The next day, the school was buzzing with rumors. Everyone had a different version of what happened, how he did it, why he did it, who found him. The truth was mixed with exaggerations, and no one really knew for sure. What hit me the hardest, though, wasn't the rumors. It was going online. I logged onto social media, expecting to see people grieving, maybe sharing memories of him, maybe just being respectful. Instead, I saw post after post making fun of his death. People turning it into a joke, laughing about it, making memes, using his pain like it was something to entertain them. My stomach twisted reading it. It felt wrong, cruel in a way that I couldn't put into words. A kid had taken his life, right in the same halls we walked every day, and people were laughing. I shut my phone off, but the images stayed in my head. The thought of him being remembered that way made me sick. I didn't know him, not really. But I couldn't shake the idea that maybe if someone had paid more attention, if someone had reached out, maybe it wouldn't have ended that way. Maybe he wouldn't have walked into that bathroom with a gun. Maybe he wouldn't have felt like the only way out was to pull the trigger. And yet here we were, with people online treating his death like a punchline. For weeks after, the atmosphere at school was heavy. Teachers tried to carry on like normal, but you could see it in their faces too. The halls felt different, the bathrooms especially. Every time I walked past the one where it happened, I felt my chest tighten. I couldn't bring myself to go in there. None of us could. It was like the air in that part of the school was poisoned. You didn't even have to say why. Everyone just avoided it. Counselors came in offering to talk, telling us about grief and loss and mental health. Some kids went, but most of us just stayed quiet, kept our heads down. It felt like no one wanted to open up. Like if you admitted it scared you, you were making yourself vulnerable. So we carried it alone, each of us in our own way. For me, it was lying awake at night, replaying the lockdown, imagining all the things that could have happened if it had been different. For others, it was making jokes, trying to laugh it off. For some, it was just silence. Months passed, but the memory never really faded. It would come back at the oddest times. Walking into the bathroom at home, hearing a siren in the distance, even just seeing a Glock in a movie. My chest would tighten, my throat would close. It was like part of me was still crouched on that classroom floor, gripping the desk leg, waiting for something to happen. And no matter how much time passed, that day was always there, a shadow I couldn't shake. Looking back now, I think the scariest part wasn't the lockdown itself, or even the thought of a shooter in the building. The scariest part was realizing how invisible someone can feel, how much pain a person can carry without anyone noticing. He was one of the quiet kids, the kind you forget to pay attention to. And because no one paid attention, his suffering stayed hidden until it exploded in the most devastating way. That thought still haunts me, maybe even more than the sirens or the lockdown. What I carry from that day isn't just fear, though. It's a lesson I can't unlearn. People can be right next to you every day, walking the same halls, sitting in the same classrooms, and you might never know what they're going through. The laughter and jokes online made it clear how cruel people can be, how easy it is to forget that behind every tragedy is a real person. But for me, it also made me realize the importance of noticing, of paying attention, of treating people with kindness even when they seem fine, because you never really know. That day didn't end with gunfire in the halls or bodies carried out on stretchers, but it ended with a loss just as heavy. A kid who felt like he had no other choice left us in a way that none of us could ignore. And while the fear of that lockdown eventually faded, the weight of what it meant never did. It changed the way I look at people, the way I walk through the world. It made me see how fragile we all are, how much a single moment can shatter everything. And even though I'll never understand exactly what drove him to that bathroom, I know I'll never forget the silence that followed, the sirens that echoed in my head, and the lesson carved into me that day: no one should ever feel that invisible. I was in high school when this happened, and I still think about it sometimes. I was part of the theater club, and if you know anything about theater kids, it's a strange mix of people. Some were the bubbly type who lived for musicals. Some were quiet and just wanted a place to belong. And some were, well, different. There was this one kid. I'll just call him Mark. He wasn't the kind of person you'd forget, even if you wanted to. He had this way of making the room feel tense whenever he walked in. He didn't really laugh much, and when he did, it wasn't in a normal way. It was short and sharp, and usually at something that wasn't even funny. Mark wasn't close with anyone in the club. He was there because he wanted to be seen, I think, but he didn't really fit. He'd hang around the edges during rehearsals, not really talking, just watching. People whispered about him a lot. They said he messed with cars, like he actually knew how to rig them up in ways that weren't just about fixing engines. There were rumors about things he had done, things too serious for kids our age to even fully understand, but nobody really wanted to confront him. He had this kind of quiet, dangerous air about him, and it was easier to just ignore it. That year, our club was going to a competition. It was a big deal. We practiced for months, ran our scenes again and again until we could do them in our sleep. The bus ride there was full of energy. Everyone running lines or joking around, eating junk food and buzzing with nerves. Mark sat alone near the back, headphones on, staring out the window. Nobody bothered him. He gave off that "don't touch me" vibe. The first day of the competition was fine. We performed, went through the rounds, hung out in the auditorium and did all the usual stuff. But then word got around that Mark had been caught with drugs. Not just a little weed, but pills. The kind that get you in serious trouble if an adult finds them. Someone had told on him. No one knew who, but the teachers were furious. They pulled him aside. And next thing we knew, he was being sent home early. It was like a weight lifted off the group when he left. People were whispering, laughing nervously about it, saying stuff like figures, and of course it was him. Everyone felt safer. I guess we all thought that was the end of it. Just one more story to tell later about the weird kid in theater who got kicked out for drugs. But then, on the ride home, things changed. We were halfway back, the bus full of chatter and relief. Some people were dozing off, others were scrolling on their phones. That's when I noticed the shift in the air. It started at the back of the bus, whispers and gasps, then nervous laughter that wasn't really laughter at all. I turned and saw people staring at their phones like they couldn't believe what they were looking at. One of my friends showed me the screen. It was Mark's social media. He had posted a picture, not just of himself, but of all the guns he owned, laid out on some ratty carpet. Rifles, handguns, more than I thought a teenager could even get. The caption under it was short and direct. "Snitches get motherfucking stitches." I felt my stomach drop. Everyone else did too. The laughter died out quick, replaced by silence and the sound of people whispering to each other about whether he knew who snitched. Nobody admitted to anything, but it didn't matter. The point was clear. Nobody said it out loud, but I know I wasn't the only one thinking about that story that had floated around months before. The one about the girl's car. She had said she had a bad feeling one night, didn't get in, and later the engine caught fire. People suspected Mark had tampered with it, that he'd rigged it so something bad would happen if she turned the key. Nobody could prove it, though. By the time anyone looked, the fire had destroyed everything. There was nothing left to link it back to him. She got lucky, that's all. So seeing that post with those guns and that caption, it didn't feel like some dumb kid mouthing off online. It felt real. It felt like something he could actually follow through on. The bus went from noisy to dead quiet. Teachers didn't know about the post yet. We all just sat there, each of us glued to our phones, waiting to see if he would post again. Some kids cried quietly, trying to hide it, while others kept refreshing his page like maybe something else would pop up, maybe something that explained it away. But nothing did. Just that one photo. Just that one caption. The rest of the ride home, nobody talked about theater or the competition or anything normal. All I could think about was what might happen next. If he'd already done something as reckless as tampering with a car, what would stop him from taking things further? And if he was angry enough to bring drugs to a competition, get caught, and then post something like that, what else was he capable of? When we finally pulled into the school parking lot, parents waiting in their cars, I felt like I was stepping off into another world. Everyone scattered fast. Nobody wanted to stand around talking like we usually did after trips. We all just grabbed our bags and left, pretending it was just another ride home. But it wasn't. The whole walk to my car, I could feel my heart pounding like he was right there watching us. In the days after, people tried to act normal, but you could tell nobody was really okay. Some kids told their parents, and their parents called the school. I don't know if the police ever got involved. If they did, nothing happened. Mark never faced any charges, never went to court. He was just gone from theater, that's all. One day he was part of the group. The next he was a shadow hanging over all of us. And nobody ever really talked about it again. That was the part that scared me the most. He didn't get punished. He didn't face any real consequences. He was still out there, still living in the same town, walking the same streets. Every time I saw a car slow down outside my house, every time I heard a loud noise in the middle of the night, my mind went straight to him. I pictured him standing outside waiting, holding one of those guns. Time moved on and eventually I graduated. I left that town, left high school, left the theater club behind. But even now, years later, when I see a post online from some angry kid with too many weapons, I feel that same knot in my stomach. I remember sitting on that bus, the way the air turned heavy and nobody wanted to speak. I remember the way it felt knowing that someone we had sat next to in rehearsal, someone who was supposed to just be another awkward high school kid, had been capable of something much darker. The last I ever heard about him, someone said he'd moved away, but nobody knew where. Maybe he's still out there, maybe he isn't. But the memory of that night, that post, and the silence on the bus will always stick with me. Because it was real, it was close, and it was proof that sometimes the scariest people aren't strangers in the dark. They're the ones sitting right next to you, hiding in plain sight. And the worst part? He walked away free. Always free. I learned very early in school that survival wasn't about being the strongest or the smartest. It was about knowing when to keep your head down and when to disappear into the background. That was how I managed to get through most of my secondary years without too much damage. I wasn't invisible, but I knew how to stay out of the line of fire. And for most of us, that was the best strategy when it came to dealing with Kaiso. Everyone knew his name. Everyone knew his grin. That grin was the thing people remembered, more than his size or his voice. It wasn't friendly. It was wide and stretched. A show of teeth that looked like a dare, like he was waiting for someone stupid enough to challenge him. He was big for his age, unnaturally big. The kind of kid that made teachers hesitate before stepping in. Some said he was held back a year, maybe 2. I don't know if that was true, but he was already taller and heavier than a lot of the staff. His presence carried weight, literally and in the way people reacted around him. He wasn't smart in the academic sense, but he was sharp where it mattered. He could smell weakness. He didn't waste his time picking at everyone. He picked carefully, like a predator. And once he had you in his sights, it was only a matter of time before you gave him what he wanted. Fear, tears, anger, anything that showed he had gotten under your skin. That was his game. Most of us learned to scatter when we saw that grin, to keep distance between us and him. He only caught me once, just once. A shove in the corridor, a laugh in my face, and that grin hovering inches from mine. It was enough. After that, I swore I'd stay out of his way at all costs. And for the most part, I did. But keeping my distance didn't mean I didn't see what he did to others. I saw enough to know how cruel he could be. There was one kid in particular he liked to target. A boy everyone knew as Barry. Barry didn't really fit into the school. Not because of his size, though he was taller and broader than most of us, but because of who he was. He had special needs, though back then none of us really had the right words for it. He was slower in class, needed more help than the rest of us, and most of the time he just kept to himself. He was harmless, genuinely harmless. Always smiling, always friendly, like he didn't have it in him to hate anybody. He was the kind of person you couldn't dislike even if you tried. But that was exactly why Kaiso went after him. On the surface, it made no sense. Barry was bigger. If they ever went head-to-head, Barry would crush him. But that wasn't how it worked. Kaiso knew Barry wouldn't fight back. He knew that Barry didn't have it in him to hurt anyone. That was the appeal. Picking on someone smaller made him look like a coward. But picking on someone bigger who wouldn't raise a hand to him made him look untouchable. It was a performance for the rest of us. Proof that no matter your size, you were still at his mercy if he wanted you to be. And so it went on. For months, I saw it play out in different ways. Sometimes it was simple. Pushing past Barry in the hall, knocking his books out of his hands, laughing when he bent to pick them up. Sometimes it was worse. I saw him corner Barry outside the gym once, taunting him, calling him names, poking him in the chest over and over until Barry's face flushed red. Barry didn't swing, didn't shout, didn't even move. He just stood there trying to shrink away even though his body was bigger than Kaiso's. We all saw it. None of us did anything. Because that was the rule. You didn't get in Kaiso's way. You didn't draw attention to yourself. You watched. You went silent. And you prayed he didn't decide to shift his focus onto you next. I don't know what finally broke inside Barry. Maybe it was the months of humiliation adding up. Or maybe it was just one bad day that tipped him over the edge. But I'll never forget the afternoon it happened. It was between classes. During one of those gray, damp days when the sky looked like it might open up any second, but never actually did. There was an open corridor between two of the buildings. More of a covered walkway, really. It had a roof, two sides of wire-reinforced glass, and doors at either end. People moved through it all the time, especially when it rained. I was cutting through there myself when I saw Kaiso ahead. He had that grin on again. Barry was just a few steps in front of him, walking slow, probably on his way to his next lesson. And then it started. At first, it was the usual, Kaiso pacing behind him, clapping his hands, trying to get a rise out of him. I don't remember the exact details, just the way it escalated so fast. One moment it was taunts, the next it was a shove. Barry stumbled forward, turned around, and something in his face was different. I'd never seen him look like that before. His smile was gone, replaced by something raw, something tight. His eyes were locked on Kaiso in a way that froze me in place. And then it happened. Barry swung. The punch connected with a sound I'll never forget. A sharp crack that echoed in the glass corridor. Kaiso went down hard. Before anyone could even process it, Barry was on him, kicking, fists flying. The glass rattled with every hit. People around me screamed. Kaiso tried to crawl away, blood already on his face, but Barry wasn't finished. He hauled him up and shoved him hard, straight into one of the glass panels. The wire mesh held for a second, then gave way with a splintering crash. Shards scattered across the floor. Kaiso went through, landing in a mess of blood and broken glass on the other side. You'd think that would have been the end of it. But Barry wasn't done. He didn't hesitate, didn't pause. He turned, ran through the door, and went straight after him. More sounds followed. Thuds, grunts, the scrape of shoes on concrete. That was the first time I'd ever seen what I later learned was called the fencing response. Kaiso's arms flailed in this strange, unnatural way as Barry's fists landed again and again. His body was trying to protect itself, but his brain wasn't in control anymore. He looked like a broken puppet. The teachers came running, shouting, pulling Barry off. It took 3 of them to drag him back. His face was twisted, red, drenched in sweat, like he wasn't even in the same world as us anymore. Kaiso lay crumpled in the glass and blood, groaning. His grin finally gone. The corridor was chaos. People crying, people whispering. The sound of glass crunching under shoes as they tried to clear the area. I stood frozen, my heart hammering in my chest, unable to look away from the wreckage. That moment stayed with me. Not just the violence, but the silence that followed. The way the air hung heavy, as if everyone understood something had shifted. Something we couldn't take back. Kaiso didn't come back to school after that. Rumors spread fast. Some said he was in hospital for weeks. Some said his parents pulled him out and moved him somewhere else. Nobody really knew. He just vanished from our lives as suddenly as he had dominated them. Barry didn't stay either. They said he was transferred for his own good. Though we all knew it was because the school didn't want another scene like that. I never saw him again, but I never forgot. For years after, I thought about it. About the way Barry's face changed, the way the glass shattered, the way Kaiso's body crumpled. It scared me more than anything Kaiso had ever done, because in that moment I realized something. We all have a breaking point. Even the gentlest, kindest soul can snap if you push them far enough. And when they do, it's not clean, it's not controlled. It's something primal, something terrifying. That day in the corridor taught me more about fear than all the times I'd avoided Kaiso's grin. Because bullies are predictable. You can dodge them, escape them, outlast them. But the moment someone finally breaks, that's when you see the kind of violence you can't prepare for. And I saw it with my own eyes. I still remember the smell of that cooking classroom. It was always a weird mix of things. Raw onions, bleach from the counters, the faint sweetness of cookie dough if another group was baking, and that metallic scent from the sinks where the knives were washed. The room had wide counters, rows of stoves, cutting boards stacked neatly on the side, and drawers filled with utensils. It was one of those elective classes everyone took because it was easy, and it meant you didn't have to sit in a normal classroom for a whole period. That day started like any other. The teacher, Mrs. Henson, was walking between groups, checking recipes, reminding people to measure correctly. She was one of those teachers who always seemed calm, even when things were chaotic. She had this quiet voice that somehow made people listen. Nothing about that day felt different at first. But it's strange how a single moment can change the way you look at a whole week of your life. I was standing near the counter with 2 other kids, chopping vegetables. My group had been assigned to make some kind of soup. I wasn't even paying much attention, just cutting slow because I didn't want to slice my own finger. Across the room was this kid everyone knew was trouble. He was the kind of kid who never followed rules. He always had a smirk, always testing how far he could push things before getting sent out of class. His name was Marcus. Marcus had already been in trouble plenty of times before. Everyone knew he had 2 strikes with the school, and if he messed up again, he was out. You'd think that would make him careful, but he didn't seem to care. He had this energy, like he wanted people to be nervous around him. And honestly, it worked. He had a reputation that went beyond school. Stories about fights outside, about kids who crossed him and regretted it. Nobody ever said those stories were completely true, but the way people acted around him made you believe them. While most of us were just trying to finish the assignment, Marcus was fooling around. At first, it was little things, tossing an apple across the counter, slamming cabinet doors louder than needed. The teacher had stepped out of the room for something, which happened sometimes. Usually it didn't matter, but Marcus saw the opening. He grabbed one of the big kitchen knives, sharper than the ones we normally used. Instead of cutting anything, he started swinging it loosely in his hand, waving it around like it was a toy. At first, some kids laughed nervously, like it was just another dumb thing he was doing for attention. But then he swung it closer to someone sitting at his counter. The kid flinched back, and Marcus laughed, like he thought it was the funniest thing. I froze with the knife I was using, staring across the room. There's a difference between goofing off and holding a blade like that. It made my stomach tighten. A couple of kids told him to cut it out, but in that half-serious way, not really expecting him to listen. He didn't. He just spun it around, careless, fast, too close to people. And then, all at once, it wasn't just a game anymore. The knife sliced across one kid's arm. It wasn't just a nick either. The kid gasped and clutched his arm, and blood started running down his sleeve, dripping onto the counter. The sound in the room changed immediately. No one laughed. Someone knocked over a stool trying to back away. My chest went cold, because seeing that much blood in a classroom was not normal. The teacher came back right then, her timing so exact it almost felt unreal. She walked in, her calm steps stopping when she saw the kid clutching his arm, the red spreading fast. Her face changed instantly, the calm dropping away. She rushed over, pulling towels from the counter, pressing them against the cut, trying to stop the bleeding. And then, for some reason, she looked at me. "What happened?" she asked, sharp, urgent. I don't know why she asked me and not anyone else. Maybe I was closest to her. Maybe she just locked eyes with me and expected an answer. My brain went blank for a second, but then I said the truth. I said Marcus had been swinging the knife around. I didn't sugarcoat it. I just said what I saw. She nodded quickly, not saying anything else, still pressing down on the bleeding. Someone was already running for the nurse. Everything blurred. For a few minutes, kids whispering, backing away, staring at Marcus. And Marcus was just standing there, not even looking guilty. He wasn't laughing anymore, but he also didn't look scared. His eyes flicked toward me, and in that second I knew I had made a mistake. After class, after everything calmed a little, the story spread. Everyone knew Marcus was on his third strike. Everyone knew that meant he was out. And everyone knew I had been the one to tell the teacher what he did. I could feel the shift as kids whispered. Word got around fast, and by the end of the day, Marcus looked right at me in the hallway and said loud enough for everyone to hear that he was going to kill me for snitching. I didn't laugh. Nobody else did either. He had that kind of reputation. I walked away fast, but his words stuck in my head, looping over and over. "I'm going to kill you." That whole week was a blur of fear. I'd walk into school and scan the hallways before going to class. I'd sit in a desk and try not to look toward the door, worried he might burst in. Every time I opened my locker, I felt exposed, like he could shove me into it or worse. Lunch was the hardest, because the cafeteria was open, crowded, easy for someone to come up behind you. I couldn't taste my food. I couldn't even focus on what people were saying. At home, I tried to act normal. My parents didn't know. I didn't want them to. They would have called the school, and that might have made things worse. I lay, awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening for noises outside my window because what if he meant it literally? What if he followed me home? I imagined footsteps in the dark, a shadow waiting around a corner. My chest tightened until it hurt. Every single day, the fear built up. Passing him in the hallway was the worst. He didn't touch me, didn't say another word, but the way he looked at me, calm, like he was just waiting for the right time, was enough to twist my stomach. I avoided eye contact, kept my head down, moved fast. My friends noticed I wasn't myself, but I brushed them off. The school must have been investigating because Marcus started missing classes. Rumors spread that he was suspended, then expelled. I didn't believe it at first. Part of me thought he would come back one morning, angrier than ever. I kept my guard up, tense every time I heard footsteps behind me. But after a while, it became clear. He wasn't coming back. He was gone. The relief didn't come all at once. It took days for the tension to drain out of me, and even then, I felt a lingering unease, like his shadow was still around the edges of the school. But eventually the fear faded. I could sit in class again without staring at the door. I could eat lunch without choking on the food. Nights stopped feeling so long. Looking back, I realize how close it felt to real danger, even if nothing ever happened after that day. The knife, the blood, the threat, those were enough to make me feel like I was living under a spotlight, waiting for something bad to strike. It showed me how one choice, telling the truth, could put a target on your back. But I also know I couldn't have done anything differently. The kid's arm had been cut open. I wasn't about to lie. In the end, nothing happened to me. Marcus was gone, expelled, moved on to wherever kids like him end up when they push too far. Life at school went back to normal eventually, but for that 1 week, I learned what it feels like to live with fear pressing on your shoulders every minute. And I'll never forget it. I still remember that morning like it was yesterday, even though the years have passed and life has carried me in 100 different directions. Some memories fade with time, blurring at the edges until they feel like dreams you can't quite put your finger on. But not this one. This memory never left me, and I doubt it ever will. It was the kind of morning that starts out as ordinary. The kind of morning you expect to be forgettable, only for something to happen that carves it deep into your mind forever. I was walking to school that day, backpack on my shoulder, the streets familiar as always. The sun had only just started climbing higher, the kind of pale light that made the air look hazy. I lived close to the school, so I didn't usually think twice about the short walk. I'd pass the same buildings, the same parked cars, the same uneven cracks in the sidewalk that I could probably still point out if I returned today. Back then, the world was smaller, and our school was the center of it. It wasn't a big school at all, just enough students to fill a handful of classrooms for each grade. Everybody knew everybody. It wasn't possible to not recognize someone, even if they weren't in your class. You'd know their name, their siblings, sometimes even what their parents did. That was the kind of place it was. The walk was usually calm. A few other students would be ahead or behind, their uniforms marking them out instantly. You didn't need to say much to one another. You'd nod, maybe exchange a word or two. But just seeing someone in the same uniform meant you shared a piece of life together. That morning, though, the usual quiet rhythm of our walk broke apart. When I turned onto the street that led directly to school, there was a cluster of people standing still, something unusual in the flow of the morning. People didn't usually stop on their way. Adults heading to work, students heading to school. It was always forward motion. But here, there was a knot of movement, voices lowered but urgent, people craning their necks, a ripple of unease traveling outward from the spot. I didn't know what I was walking into at first. It wasn't clear until I got closer, and then it hit me all at once like a punch to the chest. There on the ground, twisted awkwardly and horribly out of place, was someone in our school uniform. The sight froze me. It was one of those moments when your mind lags behind your eyes, when you're looking at something, but not letting yourself accept it. The uniform was enough. It wasn't just some stranger. It was one of us. Someone from our small school where everyone knew everyone. It wasn't just fabric, it was recognition. A thread pulling you closer whether you wanted it to or not. I remember the shoes. They were regulation shoes, the kind that scuffed quickly and made your feet ache by the end of the day. Seeing them lying there on the pavement, one foot bent at a wrong angle, was somehow worse than the rest of it. Made it real in a way my mind couldn't push away. Whispers ran through the students who'd already gathered. Some stood still, eyes wide. Others turned their faces away, unable to look. A few covered their mouths. I felt rooted to the spot, my stomach flipping as I tried to process what I was seeing. And then came the realization. This wasn't just someone who fainted or tripped or collapsed. This was someone who had jumped. You could see the angle, the broken path of the fall. The building he had come from was right there, towering above. And it didn't take long to piece it together. The 8th floor. It didn't make sense to me in those first moments. I wanted to believe maybe it was a mistake, some kind of freak accident. But the murmurs passing between people filled in the blanks. He had jumped on purpose. The name reached me a moment later. A kid who lived on that very street. I knew his face, of course I did, we all did. We weren't close friends, but I'd shared classrooms with him. Passed him in hallways, seen him laughing in groups. Seeing him lying there in a crumpled heap on the ground didn't connect with the image in my head of him standing upright, smiling, alive. It was like my brain refused to stitch the two versions together. The worst part, though, the part that still haunts me, was watching his brother come out of the building just a few minutes after. His brother stepped into the street with the same casualness as any other morning. probably heading out just like the rest of us, ready to join the stream of kids walking to school. At first, he didn't recognize him. He walked right past the gathering without a second glance, the way someone would if they assumed the drama on the street had nothing to do with them. But then someone told him, I didn't hear the words, but I saw the way his body stopped moving, so the way he froze mid-step, like his whole system just shut down for a second. And then it hit him. It hit him hard. His reaction was raw in a way I'd never seen before. Shock, confusion, denial, fear, everything pouring out at once. He didn't know how to process it because how could you? One moment you're stepping outside to go about your day, the next you're being told the person on the ground in front of you is your own brother. I felt sick just watching it. The crowd shifted, some people trying to comfort him, others backing away as if the intensity of his pain was too much to stand near. For me, it was like the air itself had grown heavier, pressing down on all of us. And then came the strangest, most unexpected twist of it all. He had fallen from the 8th floor, but he hadn't died. The electric cable strung across the street had broken his fall, slowed it just enough to keep him alive. He was mangled and unconscious, but breathing. Against all odds, he was alive. The ambulance arrived quickly. We were shuffled back, pushed to the sides of the street to give space. I watched as they lifted him carefully, the stretcher rattling as they loaded him in. His body looked fragile, like it could collapse in on itself at any moment. The sound of the sirens rising as the ambulance pulled away still rings in my ears when I think about that morning. The rest of the walk to school felt unreal. Nobody spoke. The silence between us was louder than anything words could have been. Walking into the schoolyard that day, everything was different. The chatter that usually filled the air was replaced with whispers and worried looks. Teachers moved in small groups, their faces tight. No one could focus on lessons. It was like the building itself knew something had cracked inside it. He stayed in the hospital for a long time. Word trickled back to us through classmates, through teachers, through the grapevine of small school gossip that spread everything like wildfire. At first it sounded bad. Multiple fractures, surgeries, endless days in bed. But then gradually the updates turned more hopeful. He was healing, slowly, painfully, but healing. Months later, when he came back, walking, smiling, it felt surreal. He wasn't the broken figure we'd last seen on the pavement. He was standing tall, alive, changed. Something in his eyes was different, clearer, brighter. There was a weight lifted off him, like surviving that fall had given him a second chance he wasn't going to waste. He had tried to leave this world that morning, but instead he came back with a determination none of us had seen in him before. He became more open, more willing to reach out to others, more determined to build a life worth living, and he wasn't alone in it. His family, his friends, even people who barely knew him before, they rallied around him. Support poured in from every direction. He had been one of us before, but after that day he became someone we all quietly rooted for. Looking back now, I realize that morning could have ended in the worst way. It could have been the story of a life cut short, a tragedy none of us would ever shake off. Instead, it became something else. It became a reminder of how fragile everything is, but also of how much strength people can find when they're given another chance. When I pass that street today, I still see it in my mind, the crowd, the brother, the cables swaying slightly in the air. But I also remember what came after. I remember seeing him walk again, talk again, smile again. I remember that he chose to live, really live, after almost losing it all. And maybe that's why the memory never left me. Not just because of the horror of it, but because of the way it turned around. Because sometimes the darkest mornings can lead to brighter days, even if you don't believe it in the moment. He showed us that. He lived it, and I'll never forget it. I remember that day so clearly, even though so many years have passed. It was an ordinary school day, the kind where you fall into the routine without thinking. High school had a rhythm that was predictable. The bell would ring, The halls would fill with the same voices, the same footsteps, the same mix of laughter and tired sighs. You'd sit down, get through lessons, maybe talk to friends if the teacher wasn't looking, and just wait for the day to end. Nothing about that day felt different at first. It wasn't stormy outside. It wasn't a holiday. There wasn't anything that stood out. I never expected that one of the moments that would stay burned in my memory would happen in a quiet classroom. During what should have been a calm part of the period, the class itself had been one of those longer ones, where you were given assignments, and the teacher actually expected you to sit quietly and finish them. I worked faster than most students. I always did. I wasn't the best at everything, but I had a habit of putting my head down, blocking out the noise, and finishing what was in front of me. That day was no different. The assignment was done, my pencil was down, and the teacher gave the usual permission. If you were finished, you could use the classroom computers or just surf the web quietly on your own device. It was the kind of reward teachers gave that really just filled up the silence. I had always liked music, and back then, the Backstreet Boys were something I listened to when I wanted to zone out. It wasn't about making a statement or drawing attention. It was just what I liked, and the internet felt like a safe place to scroll through fan pages, pictures, or interviews when school felt boring. I remember the glow of the monitor, the hum of the CPU, the soft sound of chairs scraping against the floor as other students moved around. The classroom had that late afternoon kind of heaviness. People were tired. The teacher sat at their desk flipping through papers, and for a few moments I was in my own world. That's when it happened. I didn't notice her coming up behind me at first. She wasn't a close friend, not even really someone I talked to. She was just another face in class, someone who sometimes laughed too loud or rolled her eyes at things. I never thought much of her, but apparently she thought something about me was worth targeting that day. Maybe it was the website I was on. Maybe it was just an impulse. Maybe it was something else boiling inside her that had nothing to do with me at all. I'll never know the full reason. The first thing I felt was the sudden yank. My necklace, a simple chain I had worn so often I forgot it was there, jerked backward, cutting into my skin. My head snapped back slightly from the pull, and before I could even raise my hands to stop it, I felt the pressure. Her hand tightened, and the chain dug hard into my throat. It's hard to explain the panic that takes over when your ability to breathe is cut off. It isn't just fear. It's your body going into a primal kind of shock. My airway felt squeezed shut. The edges of my vision blurred almost instantly, and my hands flew up, clawing at my neck, trying to pull the chain away. The pain was sharp, hot, like a burning wire biting into my skin. My chest heaved, but no air came. The sound I made wasn't even a scream. It was just a dry choke, a broken gasp. She kept pulling. I could feel her behind me, her presence solid and cruel, the force of her arm jerking the chain tighter. My chair scraped against the floor as I twisted, trying to free myself. The keyboard clattered. The screen flickered as my elbow hit it. I felt the humiliation mixed in with the terror. This wasn't happening in an alley or at night. It was happening in a classroom, in front of people. And the teacher saw. That was the part that burned itself deepest into me, even more than the physical pain. The teacher looked up. Our eyes met for a split second. They didn't move. They didn't shout. They didn't come rushing over to stop it. They just sat there watching, like this was nothing worth interrupting their day over. My lungs screamed. Black spots danced in front of my eyes. My fingernails scratched at my own skin as I tried to wedge them between the chain and my throat. The sound around me warped. The shuffle of papers, the hum of computers, the faint laughter of someone across the room. Everything felt distant and muffled, as if I was already underwater. I don't know what made her let go. Maybe she got bored. Maybe she thought she'd made her point. Maybe she didn't realize how close she was to actually killing me. 1 second, the chain was cutting deep into me. The next, there was slack. My body collapsed forward against the desk, sucking in air so hard it hurt. My throat felt raw, every swallow like sandpaper. My eyes watered, and I stayed hunched over, gasping, trying not to make a sound that would draw even more attention. The room didn't explode into chaos like you'd expect. It stayed quiet, almost eerily normal. A couple of kids glanced over, gave half smiles or shrugs like they were watching some stupid joke play out. The teacher didn't say a word. The girl walked back to her seat, calm, like nothing had happened at all. I sat there shaking. My fingers touched my neck, feeling the tender grooves where the chain had bitten into my skin. I wanted to leave, to stand up and storm out, but my legs felt weak and heavy. I couldn't tell if I was embarrassed, furious, or just numb. The rest of the class dragged on, painfully slow. I stared at the screen, but the words and images blurred together. Every few minutes I'd swallow, just to reassure myself that air was still moving, that I was still here. When the bell finally rang, I walked out of that classroom in a daze. The hallway noise hit me like a wave. Lockers slamming, people shouting, footsteps pounding on tile. It was like the world had gone on spinning, and I was the only one carrying this strange, invisible bruise. Nobody stopped me to ask if I was okay. Nobody seemed to think anything had been wrong. That night, when I got home, I stood in front of the mirror and stared at the marks. They weren't dramatic enough to shock anyone else, just faint red lines, uneven against my skin. But to me they screamed. They were proof that in the middle of an ordinary classroom in plain sight, I had come inches away from losing my breath forever. The part I could never shake was the silence, not just from the students, but from the adult who was supposed to protect us. The teacher saw me choking, saw the chain pulled tight around my throat, and chose not to move. That silence was its own kind of violence. It told me that in that moment my safety didn't matter. My life didn't matter. I didn't tell my parents right away. I didn't tell anyone, actually. It felt too surreal, too heavy, like people would laugh it off the way the other students had. I carried it quietly, the way you carry a scar under your clothes. But it changed something in me. I never wore that necklace again. I never sat in that classroom without keeping one eye on the door. I learned that sometimes danger doesn't come from dark alleys or strangers. It can come from right behind you, in the middle of the day, in a place you're supposed to feel safe. Looking back now, years later, I can still feel the pressure around my throat if I think about it too long. I can still remember the sound of the chair legs scraping, the dry, panicked rasp of trying to breathe. But more than anything, I remember the way the teacher looked at me and did nothing. That's the memory that has stayed. Not the attack itself, but the choice to let it happen. That day didn't end with sirens or shouting. It ended with me walking out of school like it was any other day. My books clutched tight against my chest. My voice caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat. It ended with me realizing that survival isn't always about running or fighting. It's sometimes just about the awful, silent luck of someone finally letting go. And it ended with me knowing that when people say, "A teacher is there to protect you," I'll always remember the one who wasn't. I was in 6th grade when it happened, and even now, years later, I can still remember every little detail. The memory is stitched so deeply into my mind that I sometimes feel like I never actually left that moment behind. The sound, the sight, the way the entire school changed after that day, it never really went away. It was a normal morning, the kind where the day felt slow and predictable, where the air outside the classroom smelled faintly of chalk and dust, where teachers were just beginning their lessons, and students were settling into the usual routine of half paying attention and half thinking about what to do during recess. My class was on one of the middle floors, and like every other day, I sat by the window with my notebook open and my pen moving lazily across the page while the teacher spoke. Then, out of nowhere, a ripple of noise moved through the hall. At first it sounded like regular commotion, the kind that happens when a younger grade finishes an activity and spills into the corridors. But quickly it changed. It was louder, more urgent, and carried something that immediately made my stomach tighten. Chairs scraped, whispers rose, and I remember one boy near the door standing up suddenly, as if he knew something we didn't. I looked over at him, confused, but before I could ask anything, I heard another student say, "Someone's outside." That was all it took. Half the class shot to their feet and rushed to the windows or toward the doorway. The teacher tried to keep order, but it was too late. Curiosity had already taken control of all of us. I got up too, and like everyone else, I leaned forward to see what was happening. What I saw made my heart stop. Up on one of the higher floors, in an area that was supposed to be empty, where the railings bordered the open space above the courtyard, there was a boy standing on the edge. He wasn't just standing, he was on the railing itself, balancing in a way that made everyone's breath catch. He was a grade above me. I recognized his face faintly, though I didn't know his name then. He was tall for his age, his uniform shirt wrinkled, his body stiff like he had already made up his mind. For a moment there was silence. It was the kind of silence that doesn't make sense in a place filled with kids, but it stretched across the hallways and classrooms as more students noticed. Word spread like wildfire, and in seconds the entire floor I was on had emptied into the hallway. People craned their necks, standing on tiptoe, trying to get a better view. Teachers appeared, panic flashing in their eyes, but none of them could do anything. The area where he stood was locked off. No one was supposed to be there. I remember my palms sweating, my heart hammering so hard I thought I was going to faint. Felt like my body knew something terrible was about to happen, but my brain refused to believe it. He stood there, frozen, his arms slightly spread out as if the balance mattered more than anything else in the world. I kept thinking, he's going to climb down, someone's going to stop him, this can't really be happening. Security guards arrived, fumbling with keys, trying to open the locked gates that led up to that floor. But it was too late. Before they could reach him, before anyone could call out something that might have changed his mind, it happened. The fall wasn't long in seconds, but it felt endless to watch. His body tipped forward and then he was gone, plunging down through the open air. The gasp that came from the crowd of students and teachers around me was one single sound. A sound I will never forget. It was followed by the loudest, most sickening thud I had ever heard in my life. It echoed through the hallways and into my chest, a sound so final and heavy that my knees almost gave out beneath me. I remember the way people screamed. Some students turned away instantly, covering their faces. Others froze like statues, their mouths hanging open. I just stood there staring, unable to process what my eyes had seen. A boy I had walked past in the hallways. A boy who might have sat near me in assemblies or eaten lunch at the same tables, was now lying motionless on the ground, and there was nothing anybody could do about it. Teachers rushed down the stairs, security too, but deep down everyone knew the truth. There was no surviving something like that. The rest of us were ushered back into classrooms, but no one listened. Everyone was whispering, shaking, some crying quietly into their sleeves. I sat back at my desk, my pen still lying across the half-written page in my notebook, and all I could hear was the echo of that thud playing over and over in my head. That night at home, I couldn't sleep. My parents noticed something was wrong with me, but I couldn't explain it properly. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what must have been going through his head before he did it. I thought about how alone he must have felt, standing there above us, knowing what he was about to do. It was a kind of loneliness I couldn't even understand at that age, but it terrified me. In the days that followed, the school changed. There was no way it couldn't. The hallways that used to feel noisy and safe now carried an invisible weight. Students whispered about him constantly, piecing together bits of information they overheard from adults. His name spread through the school, and so did the story of his family. We found out that his parents had recently divorced. They had been fighting over custody, him and his younger sister caught in the middle of it all. We learned that his father hadn't taken the news well. After finding out that the mother had won custody, the father had gotten violent. He had attacked her, beaten her badly enough to put her in the hospital. He was arrested and sentenced to prison, The mother survived, but with serious injuries. And while all this chaos was happening, their son had been left with the unbearable weight of it all. It made sense in a horrible way why he had done what he did. He must have felt crushed between two people he loved, powerless to change anything. I was too young to understand the full weight of family battles and custody disputes, but even I knew that kind of pain could break someone. The day of his funeral came quickly. The school arranged for students to attend in groups, since the entire student body wanted to pay respects. My group was scheduled in the middle of the day. We walked in lines, the air heavy and quiet, nothing like the usual chatter of students moving together. When we arrived, the atmosphere was unbearable. His coffin lay at the front, surrounded by flowers, and his mother sat in the first row with his little sister. I'll never forget the way they cried. The sound of their grief was raw, the kind that makes your chest tighten because you know no words could ever comfort it. His mother's face was pale, bandages visible on her arms where she had been hurt, and her younger daughter clung to her like she was the only thing keeping her afloat. They cried the entire time, their grief spilling out like it couldn't be contained, and watching them hurt in a way I didn't think I could even describe. When it was our turn to step forward, I couldn't look directly at his face in the open coffin. I focused on the flowers, the candles, the way the light seemed too gentle for the sadness in the room. Some students whispered prayers, some just stared at the ground. I stood there with my hands shaking, trying to make sense of how a boy who used to walk the same hallways as me was now lying there, lifeless because life had been too heavy for him to carry. The funeral ended, and we were led back to school. But nothing went back to normal. For weeks afterward, every time I walked past the spot where we had all witnessed the fall, I felt a lump in my throat. Some students avoided it altogether, taking longer routes just to keep from looking at that empty space. Others stared at it quietly as if searching for answers. The teachers tried to guide us back into routine. They talked about focusing on studies, about keeping strong, about supporting one another. But the truth was, none of us were the same anymore. We had seen something too real, too final, too close to us to ever be ignored. For me, it became one of those defining memories, the kind that doesn't fade with time. Even years later, as I grew older and began to understand more about life, about pain, about how families can sometimes fall apart in devastating ways, that moment stayed crystal clear. It taught me about fragility, about how quickly a life could be taken away, about how some wounds inside people are invisible until it's too late. Looking back now, I realized that what scared me the most wasn't just the act itself, but the silence that followed it. The silence of not knowing how many other kids around me might be carrying their own unbearable weights, walking the same halls, smiling on the outside but breaking quietly on the inside. The boy's death didn't just leave a scar on his family, it left one on all of us who witnessed it. It made childhood feel shorter, harsher, as if innocence had been ripped away before we were ready to let go of it. And yet, despite all the sadness and fear it brought, that memory also gave me something else. It gave me the understanding that life is fragile, and that people can be carrying pain so deep you can't see it unless you really look. It taught me to notice the quiet ones, to check on friends, to realize that even in school hallways filled with laughter, someone might be standing on the edge of their own railing inside their head. That lesson never left me. It shaped who I am, how I look at others, how I think about kindness and silence and the way we carry each other's weight. The boy from the grade above me never got to finish his story, but the memory of him became a warning that stays with me always. And though it was one of the saddest, scariest experiences of my life, it became a reminder to hold on tighter to the people still here, to never assume someone is fine just because they're standing beside you in class, smiling, because sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're already on the railing,